NZXT Cam. Monitor your games while playing. To learn more about it, check out the description. Hey everybody, it is the Honey Badger here, and it's time to make everyone sad. Because it's time for the tier list for patch 6.6, and when I say make everybody sad, I mean just mostly people who get sad when champions aren't where they want them to be. But besides that, I know we did miss the tier list for patch 6.5. I was just really busy the week I typically would have done it, and I was building a computer too, so at the time I didn't really have anything to make it with. So, but that's all taken care of now, and we can get back to the list. Within the last two patches, there obviously have been changes. I mean, that's what happens during a patch. But for the most part, they haven't been, like, enormous changes, and that's because we are coming up to playoffs for all the regions in the LCS and the LCK, the LPL, and all those fun things. And because of this, that means they like to tweak things to get them in order and not really have massive and drastic changes before something of importance. I think that's something that they learned the hard way last year at Worlds when they introduced all the Juggernaut changes before Worlds. So there were some issues with that, but they try to tone down the amount of craziness happening and try to get clarity into the game before those events happen. So we have seen changes, nothing crazy, but we have seen a good meta shift happen. So we're going to see a lot of champions change where they're at based on this meta shift. So the first thing we should do is jump into the tier list and see where the champions are piling up. So kicking things off in the S tier, go ahead and take a look at the list, but the two champions that we're going to talk about are going to be Orianna and Karma. Now, Orianna is a champion I've had up in S for a while now. And realistically, first thing I'm going to say, I think S tier right now is the most confusing tier on where champions are falling. We've seen a lot of champions being nerfed just over the last, let's just say 6 months from champions in the mid lane. The reason for this is because I think of the meta last season that has really made this change the way it is. What happened was mid lane was very important the last 2 seasons. Mid laners had the most carry potential. The game was built around mid laners. ADCs were still decent, but nowhere near as good as they are now. They weren't as big of a carry threat, you could say, as the mid laners were. And so mid lane has kind of been getting toned down to kind of make way for the ADCs now in the game. Granted, mid laners can obviously still carry, but they've been toning down a lot of the champions. Orianna, though, is one of the few that hasn't seen a lot of the changes to tone her down. In fact, she's just got a small buff, which I think is actually kind of funny because it made her even better. And she's always been a really good champion. And I know she's not played all the time or constantly, and I think that has to do with team comps, which is one of the reasons why, but she still is quite good right now. And she's really worth looking at, to be completely honest, if you don't play her. Now, moving things on, this is probably one of my bigger shifts in the patch, is going to be Karma moving up to S. We've seen a lot of play from her. We've seen positive changes for her, just from the beginning of the season to small buffs that she's been receiving. We're also seeing that she got a buff this last patch moving her up. She's got a decent win rate, and she has some pretty good utility on her kit, honestly, with some good damage. So I'm going to move Karma up here for now. The last time I made a bold pick to move a support up to S tier, it was Soraka, and she was well worth it because she got changed after she was incredibly overpowered, some would say, and she's actually still quite really good, which is why she's still here too. But that is mostly what is going on in S tier for now. Some stuff in the top hasn't really changed, but we're getting a fluid meta currently happening, and a lot of champions are falling similar, and there's a lot of flex pick happening. Moving things on to the A tier, though, things in here have moved around quite a bit just throughout the tiers. A lot of people just leapfrogging each other with small buffs and nerfs. Like I said, these patches that we've had aren't like enormous changes to some champions. Some are falling a little bit, like Nidalee, and some are moving up a little bit, like Gnar and other champions that are getting some quality of life buffs and some other nerfs to items that are moving other champions down and moving them up because they typically weren't relying on them like other champions who get their power spike from items. Always remember that too within a tier list and a patch. If an item gets a change, that affects a champion pretty heavily. And it can affect other champions that don't even buy those items because those items could have been countering them. So always remember, it's not just the raw nerfs and buffs that happen to champions to move them up the list. It's a lot of items and meta stuff too behind all of this. It's not just any one thing. But the two champions obviously we're going to talk about are Sejuani and Azir. Sejuani's been finding herself moving back up the list finally. She slowly was falling down after Cinderhulk from last season. Now she's moving back up. She got some positive buffs to make her way more of a contested pick now. Part of me wants to move her up into God mode, into S tier, but I think it's just a little too soon. We need a little bit more time with her and some more sampling to see where she really is going to fall. But she saw some really positive changes, and she brings some good damage. She still lacks some of her late game damage that she used to have when they nerfed her originally, with some of her percentage health damage coming off. But realistically, she's in a much better place now. She still has the early gank. She still has the sustain. She still has great engagements just throughout the game as well. So she's finding herself back up here with some small buffs that did definitely turn her kit around. As for Azir, Azir's also moving up the list. Another very drastic change to him. He's been seeing a lot of bug fixes, and he's been seeing some small buffs as well. I think one of the big reasons we're starting to see him again, though, is because of meta changes and meta shifts. We're getting a lot more tanky champions. Tanky champions like to scale up into the late game. Azir's one of the few champions in the late game that can actually shred through tanks, let alone do a lot of damage because he scales into the late game. So one of the reasons why we're starting to see him back up in the LCS, both the EU. We'll see if he comes back in the NA. He's gotten some bans, but that's mostly because Phoenix is really good at him. But Azir is moving back up. I don't think he'll ever get back up to S tier unless we see more champions in mid fall and get nerfed, or if they buff him again, which I don't think they will. But he's nowhere near the Azir crazy power that he was when he was super strong for that little stint in the end / middle to end. Or was it all season? It really was all season last year when he was just super strong for a long time, and then they started just nerfing him down. But I don't think we'll get him back up to crazy God mode Azir when he was just destroying people. But he's definitely a much better pick now with some of the positive changes and the meta shift that has come into play. Moving things on to the B tier, still a good tier to be in. These champions are still viable, just maybe not quite as contested most of the time as some of the others, but definitely good pocket picks depending on if you're going for counters, and just solid champions realistically overall. Handful of champions moved up here from the lower tier. I think Volibear is one of the ones that a lot of people might be happy to see move up a little bit because tank meta coming back and just some other reasons. But for the most part, we're going to talk about Master Yi and Kalista. Now, realistically, Kalista got kicked down here, and Master Yi also got kicked down here from A tier. Master Yi's nerf in the patch was a nerf buff, is what we would call it. It's a buff for everybody who's building damage crit Yi, but that's a greedier build, and it's risk reward, you would call it. I don't know if that nerf buff really affected Yi too much. We talked about it in the patch quite a bit. It's not as impactful probably overall, but it should definitely take power out of the most annoying version of Yi, which is on-hit effect tanky Yi, and that has moved him down. So obviously a good B is still a good tier and viable. There's always the double-edged sword of Master Yi though, where you know if they have the crowd control and if they have half a brain, they have a chance to annihilate you regardless. So you do have to be careful with Master Yi now, especially if you're going to be switching back over to probably a sated crit build instead of a full on-hit build. So Master Yi is going to find himself sliding down for now. We'll see if any changes come back. I'm wondering if they're going to like the changes that they made to him and if they'll hold, but we'll keep an eye on that for future patches. As for Kalista, she got kind of whacked in the face with the nerf stick. She's fallen down quite a bit. I think she will still be played occasionally, maybe in the professional scene, but for the most part, this kind of makes her slightly less viable overall, and it makes sense. She's been in a good power state for a while now, very contested, some would say, so Kalista, for the most part, is going to find herself down here for now. I want to see if more changes to her, and obviously some more time can bring her back up. It's always hard to get a handle on a champion only a week after a patch comes out, just because you can make assumptions and we can see stats and I can see playstyles and see what's happening to a champion and off of their stats, but overall, time can always just shape where a champion's at, and that has to do with items, meta, and just playstyles. So she's going to be here for now. On to the C tier. I typically don't talk about any champions in the C tier, but I want to just talk about Maokai for a second. He is a champion that is going to be probably rising up the tier list finally. Riot even said it themselves in their patch. This is a tank-heavy meta, and we have seen the absence of a very formidable tank last season, which was Maokai. They really nerfed him into the ground, and he's really started to feel borderline worthless in the top lane, which is why he's down into the OK tier, where they're lacking, but obviously it could be worse. But that's why he was down in the lacking tier. He just was, in fact, lacking. Now with the buffs, I want to move him up into B tier, but I'm going to wait a patch because it was so bad just previously. So he's going to be the top of C tier, but that's not really saying much, to be honest. So hopefully Hecarim gets out of here too sometime. He's also kind of a coin flip. The other three are still pretty bad. They still need some help, but we'll see if they get it eventually. But Maokai, we'll keep an eye on him, and we'll see if he can rise up from the ashes, to say. And finally, on to the F tier. If you noticed, we actually had moved Zilean out of this tier. He's been in it for a while. We moved him up into B tier as a mid laner, top of B for mid. We'll see if he continues to come up. There's some power there, but there's still some issues with him. But I definitely at least have found a spot for him, you could say. And that's a good thing, you could say. But besides that, in the difficult to place or joke status, they're not joke status. They're not bad champions. It's just Teemo and Mord. They're hard to place right now. I haven't seen a good sample size of Mordekaiser, and Teemo's just so sporadically played and almost now borderline a jungler from what's been happening in meta shifts. So, and I don't want to get any of my bias in on Mordekaiser. Not that I'd throw him up in God mode right now. He's definitely not God mode. I think he's A-ish tier. B, and Teemo's probably A-ish jungle, B-ish top tier. So, we'll see. We'll hopefully see what happens to them in the future and see if that can change them. But that is the tier list for patch 6.6. I hope you guys liked it. Chances are you didn't because most people don't, but that's what happens. But if you have a comment or a concern, leave it down below in the comments. If you liked the video, I would appreciate it if you gave it a big thumbs up. If you didn't like it, you can also hit thumbs down. Doesn't matter. It just makes the video more popular regardless. I will accept it either way. But I want to thank all of you for watching, and I will hopefully see all of you in some future content later this week.